Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. More measles cases are identified in Utah, including the first in a child. The Forsyth fire grows to 8,200 acres as firefighters brace for the return of hot, dry conditions. And residents say a summer spot that Utahns and Idahoans love is losing its charm. Joining me on the Behind the Headlines today, Salt Lake Tribune emerging news reporter Brock Marchant. Brock, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. We have reporter Brooke Larsen with us. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And we have Utah Public Radio and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper. Clarissa, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with Brock. Measles cases. We've been hearing about more measles cases across the nation, and now here in Utah. How many measles cases confirmed at this point?
So as of yesterday, the Department of Health and Human Services had confirmed 5 measles cases so far. However, they said that they expect, that they will be confirming more in the coming days, and also that, there are cases that they haven't really heard about that, haven't been confirmed, but likely are there.
Are these folks? Are they giving this information to these folks on their vaccination status? Were these folks vaccinated?
So none of the 5 confirmed cases had been vaccinated. No.
And according to your reporting, at least one is a child at this point.
Yeah. So one of the confirmed cases announced yesterday was someone under 18. The health department didn't really specify on an age range within that, but we do know they were a child.
Do we know where in the state these cases are?
So we know that the 2 yesterday, one was in Utah County, another was in St. George, or not St. George, excuse me, but in the southwestern portion of the state, in one of those counties. Um, that was the same as 2 other cases that were confirmed earlier this week. So those have been the 2 most popular areas so far among the confirmed cases.
Thankfully, we haven't had that many, outbreaks of measles. Are officials saying why they think we're having more, nationwide and here in Utah?
They haven't really specified here in Utah, but they have recommended and really emphasized the need to get vaccinated, or strongly recommended vaccination, especially among people who could be a little bit or who could be more susceptible to complications with the disease. Um, they said that people who aren't vaccinated could, could end up getting a more severe version, as well as being much more likely to get the disease, saying that the vaccination can be 97% effective. So they've really been urging people, as these cases are confirmed, to seek vaccination.
So understand if you're vaccinated, you could still get measles, but it's probably going to be milder.
Yes, exactly. They said there's a slight chance that someone, even if they have received the vaccination, could get infected with it. But yeah, it's likely to be a less severe case.
No, we've been blessed. We haven't seen that many cases of measles. People, if they get measles, they may not even know what it is. What are the symptoms?
So there are several that people could see. Typically, what that starts looking like, people can develop a fever over 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit, a cough, a runny nose, and red eyes. After 4 days of having that fever, people generally start to develop a rash as well. And that, according to the health department, will typically start at someone's hairline before spreading across their face into their body.
Hmm. Now, this can be especially a problem if a woman is pregnant, right, and develops measles.
Yeah, so 2 of the people who have had confirmed cases in Utah have been pregnant. And the health department did mention that people who are pregnant can be, um, you know, their risks are greater. They said that there can be complications with their pregnancy, the infection itself can have stronger impacts on them. So yeah, it definitely is more of a risk, and they've recommended people who are planning to get pregnant and haven't been vaccinated to seriously consider that, and to think about those risks beforehand.
No, very small infants also at risk because you have to be a certain age to get vaccinated, right? So if you're a very small infant, need to be
Yeah,
protected.
yeah. Yeah, there are certain guidelines that the Utah Department of Health and Human Services has posted on their website for at what age kids should get vaccinated and in what circumstances. But one thing they did say is, when a child is young enough and the vaccine isn't really going to benefit them, what can benefit them and what can help prevent them from becoming infected is going to be the adults around them, the people who are able to get that vaccine, getting that vaccine.
It sounds like measles is fairly infectious, given the guidance that I guess state officials are saying. They say call your healthcare provider first. Don't just show up.
Yeah, there's certainly concern that if people are, if they have these symptoms and they go to their doctor or an urgent care or a clinic, then they're going to, expose other people, especially people who might be sick because they're at a doctor's office. So they have given that guidance of if you think you might have measles, if you think you've been exposed and you're seeing these symptoms, call a doctor or clinic's office ahead. Don't just show up and potentially put other people at risk of also becoming exposed. They also said they've been working with different medical providers throughout the state for months, kind of anticipating these cases and getting ready with alternative entrances and getting ready to, maybe put up signs or notices about symptoms and what someone can do if they have those symptoms to, maybe get through a waiting room sooner so they're not exposing others.
I understand from your reporting that you could get infected and the symptoms wouldn't show up till a week or two later.
Yeah, typically that's what the health department said is that they can show up 7 to 14 days after the infection itself.
Yeah, so that it makes it problematic. So officials, they're trying to stay ahead of this. They're trying to track infections or people who've been exposed.
Yeah, they are. So they after the first case that was announced on June 20th, they released areas where people potentially could have been exposed. As of yesterday, they hadn't added any more areas to that. They did say the two people yesterday that were infected, they had believed were exposed before. But yeah, they're trying to track that to warn people who might have been exposed, and also keep the public updated on cases. Yesterday, they said they're going to start releasing weekly counts on Wednesday.
And a couple of people who've gotten measles have been hospitalized. It sounds like.
Yeah, they said that two people have been hospitalized. Two of the five have been infected so far. They've been released since.
So the vaccine, this is the kind of the usual MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. Yeah, mumps can be quite the deal. Rubella as well. These are all infections you don't want to get. So this is kind of the regular part of the regular course that children get.
Yeah. I mean, that's a typical vaccine that they found to be largely effective is the MMR. And it was interesting speaking with officials at the health department yesterday. They mentioned how, some areas of the state, southern portions of the state, show that they have less vaccinations than, maybe other portions disproportionately. And so they're really urging people now, if they're not vaccinated with that MMR vaccine for whatever reason, that they consider the risks that them or their kids could get the measles, could get those symptoms, and could end up with a more serious case than if they had that vaccination. So they're encouraging people to speak with their doctor to consider getting that vaccination if they have not yet.
Yeah, adults can get it as well, right? To get the vaccination. So yeah, and I guess you might need a booster, right? If you've had your
Yeah,
MMR
yeah,
when you were a kid and now you're older. So yeah, talk to your doctor, I guess, right?
absolutely. Yeah, they have guidelines on their website, what specific years or ages might need a booster, might need a new vaccine. And yeah, of course, people can talk to their doctor.
So yeah, you have in your story, according to the CDC, measles has spread to 37 states, cases in 37 states at this point.
Yeah, that was updated as of Tuesday. That there were 1,227 confirmed measles cases among those 37 states, including Utah.
Oh, Brock, I'd like to move to another story you had, the very interesting story. Here's the headline. A University of Utah doctor's research led to a major HIV drug. And he worries now federal cuts will stop people from getting it. So who are we talking about here?
So this is Wesley Sundquist. He's the chair of the University of Utah's Department of Biochemistry in the Spencer Fox Eccles School of Medicine. And him and his team, starting back in the 90s, researched the HIV virus's capsids, a specific part of the virus structure that they found interesting given its shape. And their research led to interesting discoveries about the virus, how it can replicate. And because of that, lenacapavir, the development of this drug used that research.
So this capsid, I understand, that's the shell which holds the material, and I guess for HIV, it's to be for the virus to be effective, it has to be a certain shape.
Yeah. So he essentially said that it was interesting to him and research teams because it was it was shaped like a cone. So he looked more into it, and they did find that if they could make that unstable, if they could destabilize that cone and that structure, then they could largely prevent the virus from replicating. And this is lenacapavir is a medicine that was approved a few years ago to treat HIV infections. It was approved much more recently to help prevent HIV after studies found it largely effective.
So this was work what in the 90s into the 2000s.
Yeah, so it was interesting speaking with him because he mentioned a lot of awards, a lot of notice that's gone to this drug and to his work recently. He mentioned though that a lot of it's been trials, a lot of it's been the pharmaceutical company developing the drug. And for him, a lot of the interesting breakthroughs came, decades before. But it's just that process of testing, developing a drug with that research. But yes, it's been a long time in the works.
So before we get to distribution of the drug, which might be affected by federal government cuts, he did underline to you that he was 12 straight years in this research before they had their breakthroughs, and that research was funded by federal grants.
Yeah, absolutely. Amidst researchers wondering if they're going to still have that funding, he was very, adamant that knowing that they had a funding source guaranteed throughout the research is what allowed them to conduct that research, which eventually led to this drug, even before they knew that it would. He mentioned how without the knowledge and the guarantee of that funding, it probably wouldn't have come to fruition.
So, as you mentioned, awards, right? Lenacapavir was awarded Science Magazine's 2024 Breakthrough of the Year, various other awards. Very effective, not only in treating HIV and AIDS, but preventing, right, the virus from taking hold. So, what is the potential problem at this point with government cutbacks?
So a concern that Sunquist shared is as this drug is developed, as it's going to be marketed within the United States, the company that developed the drug, now that it's going to be available for consumers, also allowed several generic versions and several companies to develop generic versions in order for that to be distributed internationally to communities who are going to be the most in need to help prevent HIV infections. Uh, so Sundquist is worried, though, that if federal funding cuts come to these programs that help prevent HIV internationally, this drug that, could have a very big impact in not only treating but just preventing HIV infections might not make it to the places where it's needed the most, given how impactful it could be, and given the current concerns with federal funding cuts coming from the Trump administration.
So this will be directly affected by PEPFAR. We've been hearing about that, right, in conjunction with the USAID cuts, et cetera. So that's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, is instituted by George W. Bush.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there are concerns that the Associated Press has reported on that the Trump administration has asked Congress to rescind $400 million that have been allocated to help assist with the global HIV epidemic. And there have been reports that this administration has limited PEPFAR to just treating and caring for the HIV infected and preventing mother and to child transmission, which this drug is meant to be a preventative in general, so it's not so much of a treatment.
HIV infections is still a problem in various countries around the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for telling us about this, Brock. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
We've been talking with emerging news reporter Brock Marchant, and he'll be back with underplayed stories of the week later in the program. Following a break, we are going to talk with Salt Lake Tribune reporter Brooke Larsen and to talk about wildfires in Utah. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. We'll have more following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We turn next to Salt Lake Tribune reporter Brooke Larsen. Brooke, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom.
So you're fairly new to the Tribune?
Yeah, just started a couple weeks ago.
All right. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I've been writing for High Country News the past couple years. I primarily have covered land, water, energy issues, rural communities across the West broadly. High Country News is region-wide magazine, but being based in Utah, cover issues in Utah a lot, and I'm really excited to be with the Salt Lake Tribune, where I get to cover, local communities every day now. So I am the Southwestern Utah reporter. We'll be joining Mark Eddington down in St. George in the process of moving actually this weekend. So I'm currently in Salt Lake, but we'll be heading down south soon.
Okay. You'll be in St. George or in that area, I guess. So.
Yep, I will be in St. George, but covering southwestern Utah broadly and, sometimes southern Utah beyond Washington and Iron County as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's good to have you on board. Let's talk about wildfires. You've been covering these. I guess 'tis the season, right? So let's talk about the Forsyth fire first. What's the status?
Yeah, so the status I have as of this morning, the Forsyth fire is at 10,673 acres. The containment is at 8%, and there's currently 704 people fighting that fire. The cause is lightning, and the biggest tragedy with this fire is that it destroyed 13 homes in the Pine Valley community north of St. George down in Washington County. So that's been the biggest loss. I've heard from the firefighters is just losing those 13 homes is a big deal for them, and obviously the residents of that community.
So yeah, tell me a little bit more about the area. This is near Bryce Canyon National Park, right? Pine Valley, Grass Valley are some areas near, or I guess in the fire?
The Forsyth fire is in the Pine Valley Mountains, so that's actually closer to St. George. The France Canyon fire is the fire burning near Bryce Canyon. So we have two big fires in southwest Utah right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was a meeting recently. The firefighters officials were meeting with residents there. As you mentioned, there are some homes there, right? 13 have burned. What are officials saying?
Yeah, so my story earlier this week was about a community meeting that happened on Monday where they shared a ton of information, but there was another meeting yesterday evening, and we'll have a story up on that shortly this morning, where they actually let residents know that they are welcome to go back home this weekend. So as of 10 a.m. this morning, residents of Pine Valley, Grass Valley, and Grays Ranch, some of the communities that have been on these evacuation orders, are able to return home. They will still be on the set status. So that's kind of the middle road status where, residents should still be alert and ready to be able to leave in case the county escalates it back to that go status that they've been on for the past week. So, things are not totally in the clear. The fire is still burning and growing, and we have critical fire weather returning this weekend, really hot, dry, windy conditions. So, I just want to emphasize they're not in the clear, but the firefighters have done a ton of work they call it mopping up, basically smothering the fire within the Pine Valley area where, most people in this area live, smothering the fire with water, taking down burnt trees to make it safer for people to return home. So community members are, from what I can gather, really excited to return home, but, the firefighters and the folks working on this at the community meeting yesterday also emphasized their homes are not going to look like what they did before, right? There will likely be burnt trees around, ash pits, a lot of hazards that community members have to be prepared for and take extra precautions around.
It was interesting that this previous meeting, the earlier meeting that you reported on, the firefighters and officials told the residents, please stay away, at least at that point. Mm-hmm. In part because so the firefighters don't have to worry about you and only worry about the fire, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're still emphasizing that of let the firefighters do their job. It's really smoky, especially at night and kind of into mid-morning. An inversion has been setting in, and the smoke has reached extremely hazardous levels, off the charts into the purple. And so when it's smoky, not only is that obviously bad for residents' health, but it also decreases visibility. So they're asking residents to be really cautious if they're driving around, especially, later at night during those smoky inversion times, so that they don't interrupt any activity the firefighters are doing. They also asked residents to not call 911. And, they may see a tree suddenly spark fire, it's still hot, an active area, and they may see things and get really concerned, understandably. The Pine Valley Fire Chief, Robert Hardy, asked residents to call him directly instead of 911, just because they're already managing so much, and there's so many firefighters on the ground that are prepared to respond to those things quickly.
Firefighters were grateful. The community's been very supportive. Sounds like I don't know if I would. It doesn't say much good about me, but I wouldn't even have thought of giving the firefighters water or food or whatever. But or maybe I would have. I don't know. But the community's been an outpouring of support.
Yes. I mean, I've seen this just all over Facebook. People asking where they can donate, and fire departments having to turn people away, saying we have enough water, we have enough food, we have enough supplies. So yeah, it's definitely something that I've heard from the fire chiefs, the people leading this, that they're so grateful for all the support, and that they're getting more donations than they can take in.
It was interesting. This work must be pulse pounding. You were describing some firefighters dropped into an area by rappelling off a helicopter.
Yeah, I mean, that's been fascinating for me to learn more about as I've been covering this, just the challenges the firefighters face. And, on this fire, they did that earlier this week. Firefighters were rappelling out of aircraft to get into areas. Even the pilots flying the helicopters and other aircraft they're using, it's a really exhausting, challenging job. I mean, being a pilot, for anyone, it flying any aircraft is challenging, but doing that in an area that's burning where there's smoke, visibility's down. It's also very high pressure. It's very tactical. So I've heard that's really exhausting work. And with these high winds, they have to be pretty strategic about when they send the aircraft out. And in France Canyon Fire, which is the one that's burning closer to Bryce Canyon National Park, and even with Forsyth, there's some areas that are just really rocky, cliffy areas that's pretty dangerous for firefighters on the ground, especially because some of these areas have had previous fires, right? So there's these burn scars that can be helpful for containing the fire, but it's dangerous for firefighters to be in those areas, especially when the high winds pick up, because there's a lot of, they call them snags, basically dead or dying trees that can fall over and kill firefighters. Firefighters die every year from these snags falling over. And the France Canyon fire, last week they would see ash move a mile or two north of the fire. And so they knew they had to get crews off the ground when those conditions were happening, just because they're in these dangerous areas. You can't outrun a fire. So the firefighters have definitely been working in challenging terrain, dealing with scary conditions, especially on the high wind days. But they're making progress. They're reaching the containment is going up on both of these fires. So that's a good sign. But I'm also hearing they're going to be around for a while, especially with the hot, dry weather we have coming this weekend. We will likely see more growth in acres.
So some progress. Finally, are there any road closures in these areas still in effect?
Yes, so the France Canyon fire, the last that I heard, I haven't gotten the most recent updates yet this morning, but road closures include all national forest lands south of Utah State Route 12 on the Powell Ranger District. And that's with the exception of trails and campgrounds in the Red Canyon area. The East Fork Road near Bryce Canyon also remains closed. They're using that East Fork Road as kind of a strategic fire line to prevent the fire from moving further east towards the park. But State Route 12 and Highway 89, as well as Bryce Canyon National Park, remain open.
All right. Well, thanks for telling us about these. I'd like to talk about a story. This is from a couple of weeks ago, but interesting story. Zion National Park has reopened a bridge 2 years after it was closed down. Why was it? I guess first of all, where is this, and why was it closed down?
Yeah, so this bridge connects Zion Lodge and Zion National Park to the Emerald Pools hiking trail system, which is a popular trail system in the park. It kind of weaves through these ephemeral waterfalls, and as the name suggests, these emerald green pools that are not only scenic, but essential water bodies for wildlife in the park. And so a couple years ago, they had to close this bridge because after the record wet winter we had in Utah, all that rushing snowmelt triggered a landslide that damaged the bridge. But also the park had been noticing that the foundation of the bridge was already being destabilized just from ground movement in that area. Zion is a very dynamic area, intense heat, rain, freezing, geologic movement happening there all the time. And it just happened to be where this bridge was also an area where the ground was moving. So it was a combination of these kind of longer term effects, as well as that distinct event with the landslide.
So it sounds like they were able to preserve the bridge itself. They just moved it to a new foundation, up or downstream?
Yeah, so fortunately, it was just that foundation of the bridge that was damaged, and so they were able to keep the actual steel bridge itself and just move it 100 feet upstream on the Virgin River. And it's kind of neat because that bridge was initially built by St. George Steel in 1983. So it's like this kind of piece of history for the park that park staff were happy to be able to preserve.
Now, the park is anticipating perhaps, they're planning for the future in which the Virgin River at that point might be quite a bit wider.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting to me. Basically, decades ago, I think it was in sort of the Civilian Conservation Corps era, these gabions, like these sort of wire mesh baskets filled with rocks and dirt on the edge of the river that were meant to kind of constrain the river, direct its flow. The park is actually now kind of reversing what they did decades ago and allowing those to basically erode away. And so as those break down, wash away, as they take those out, the river will widen. And so one thing they did that was kind of interesting, they dug the foundation of this bridge down deeper. And so as the river widens, it may widen past the current edge of the bridge, and the park would just like build on an additional structure to widen the bridge. And because that foundation is deeper, it should remain stable even if water goes over it.
All right. Well, I've learned at least one word here from your story, gabion. I've seen them. I didn't know what that was called, but yes, learned a lot more from your stories as well. Brooke Larsen, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll have her back just briefly here at the end of the hour for Underplayed Stories of the Week as well. And we're heading toward another break. Following the break, we'll be talking with Utah Public Radio and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper. Here's the headline. Residents say a summer spot that Utahns and Idahoans love is losing its charm. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. We'll have more following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We bring in next Utah Public Radio and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper. Clarissa, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
So let's talk about this story first, about the Bear Lake. We had you on recently to talk about the black bears returning. And now we're talking about the residents, the human residents here. Here's the headline. Residents say a summer spot that Utahns and Idahoans love is losing its charm. We're talking about Bear Lake area. So this is reporting is based on a survey, right? Tell us about this survey.
Yeah, so Utah State University's Community and Natural Resources Institute has been surveying the Bear Lake area for quite some time and putting together some reports about how residents are responding to changing environmental things at Bear Lake, but also just community changes at Bear Lake. And so this story that I wrote was just focusing in on one aspect of that survey, which is short-term rentals.
Now, my understanding is that the survey went out, I guess, last year, just kind of an overall survey, but this is one area that people kept bringing up on their own.
Yeah, so they actually, it's not like a typical survey where they sent it out to people. They actually went and interviewed residents who live there. And yeah, they said they weren't even going to talk about short-term rentals. They were going to talk about development around the lake, different environmental challenges. But every single or almost all of the residents they interviewed brought up short-term rentals in their conversations. So they decided it warranted writing about it.
So short-term rentals, this be Airbnb, Vrbo, that kind of thing?
Yeah, anything for a bigger group, a house, a residence like that.
So what are the residents in favor of this or not in favor? What were they bringing it up for?
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily that residents are anti-Airbnb, anti-short-term rental, but residents were bringing up some concerns that they are just exploding in the area. So in 2020, there was a rise in tourism at Bear Lake because everybody was traveling around that time outside. But that also coincided with the growing number of Airbnb properties. And so there was a lack of hotels And so once the tourism happened, it seemed that a lot of Airbnbs just showed up, and residents are bringing up concerns that there's just more Airbnbs than there are people who live there, or the Airbnbs aren't very respectful. There's varying problems with them that were brought up.
Do we have a idea of the scope of this? I think your reporting said it was about 1,000 just Airbnb. That's to say nothing of Vrbo and others, right?
Yeah, that's 1,000 Airbnbs are in Garden City and Bear Lake, or Rich County, Utah, and Bear Lake County, Idaho, which combined they have less than 10,000 residents who live there.
Yeah, not a whole lot of residents. Now this does fluctuate. I think this is affecting kind of the usual seasonal residents. You can't book a place for the whole season because of these Airbnbs.
Yeah.
So tell me again about the problems this summer. I guess some a lot of these residents, I imagine, are respectful, but others are causing some problems.
Yeah, so the problems kind of come up with the varying laws there are for short-term rentals, because Bear Lake is half in Utah, half in Idaho. So half the lake is the problem with short-term rentals isn't that bad, because in Utah, short-term rentals are regulated with just simple rules, like you can only have a certain amount of guests, you have to have this amount of parking spaces, kind of things like that. But in Idaho, I talked to Mitch Polson, who's the Bear Lake commissioner for the Bear Lake Regional Commission. And he said, Idaho has no regulations. So you can turn almost any property into an Airbnb. And that's kind of led to problems with overcrowding at the Airbnb. So people will book an Airbnb with a 2-bedroom Airbnb, and they'll bring their whole family and they'll camp in the front yard. They'll be overcrowding the Airbnb, which just leads to, disruptions in these people's neighborhood.
One person you talked to said that kind of a disparity in wealth. The wealthier people may be buying these places and then now doing short-term rentals. Kind of a bigger contrast with the long-term residents.
Yeah, there were some concerns that development around the lake and the homes that are being built aren't being built for people who live there. They're being built for visitors because.
So overcrowding, I guess, as you said, camping in yards, overloading septic systems, garbage, I guess, are some of the problems.
Yeah, garbage, noise complaints. Just some residents say the people who are traveling there aren't being very respectful, and not really respecting that it's people who live there, not just vacation there when they visit.
You talked to president of an HOA, and that HOA had outlawed short-term rentals, but the Idaho legislature has since weighed in.
Yeah, so they banned short-term rentals, and then the Idaho legislature passed a new law limiting restrictions on them, but they're still allowed to keep their law because they had it in place before that. So, but they said that they survey their HOA members, and nobody wants short-term rentals in their neighborhood. I actually, the guy I talked to, what's his name? Kevin McLeod. He said that there's other communities that he knows of where people bought a really expensive home and they live there and they're surrounded by short-term rentals. And he just says they just complain about how they're stuck in a neighborhood full of short-term rentals, and he doesn't want that for his HOA.
So I guess some residents see this as a problem, I guess, in the entire area. This is an interesting, case study in different governments and how they handle it, right? Because it's the Bear Lake area is split between two states, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and Mitch Polson, he was saying, people in Idaho aren't the same as people in Utah when they go on trips. Like Bear Lake is a hot spot for family reunions, for big groups of families, but the Idaho government might not see that need for restrictions on Airbnb and stuff because people who visit Boise aren't the same people who visit Bear Lake.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that would have an effect, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say about this story?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, very interesting story. I want to move to this one as well to close the program. Here's the headline: Cache Valley's first cidery is opening this weekend. Here's a look inside. A cidery. Tell me what's a cidery?
Yeah, so it's a place that bottles and serves cider. Yeah, Ben Kuth and Lori Spears, they're locals here in Cache Valley who grow cider apple trees. And they just decided to open their own cidery. And Cache Valley doesn't have one. Cache Valley only has a couple of places where you can go to get served alcohol like that.
So this is what you might call hard cider. I don't know if that's the actual term for these alcoholic ciders.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is made generally from apples. Any other ingredients?
Yeah, it gets mixed with a variety of other fruits. I remember them talking about cherries, strawberries, ginger. Yeah, they like to experiment with different things.
And a whole variety of apples, I guess.
Yeah, they said 10 plus varieties of apples, and they grow the apples themselves as well as they get apples from Utah local growers.
So you can go to the cidery and I guess purchase. You also sample.
Yeah, you can sample it there. You can only have up to 5 ounces because it's not technically like a regular bar. But yeah, you can purchase the bottled cider there and you can try it.
So it's interesting. This has become a passion of theirs. I guess they moved to Paradise and just discovered this. It's called Hobbled Dog. Why is it called Hobbled Dog?
Yeah, this is a cute story. So the couple who started the cidery, they adopt three-legged dogs and disabled dogs, blind dogs. And so their friends, when they moved to Paradise, would call them their new property the Hobbled Dog Farm because they had multiple three-legged dogs. So they just said the name fit and they wanted to keep it for their cidery.
Yeah, it's interesting. They said right now we have a blind dog and a boxer is missing a leg, and they wanted to say it just fits us. So they like to save or give homes to these dogs, which is great.
Yeah, and they even named their cider tanks in the back after them. They have big labels with their pets' names on them.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say about this one?
No, other than support local businesses.
That's right. Yeah. Cache Valley's first cidery, which is now open. Well, we're reaching near the end of the program. Time for our underplayed stories of the week. I'd say thank you to you, Clarissa. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
So let's move to our underplayed stories of the week. We have a little time, so you could have two if you want. Brock Marchant, first to you.
Yeah, I really appreciated Jose Davila's reporting on the story. Salt Lake City's troubled Jordan River inching toward brighter days, advocates say. I think he really captured an important moment for city leaders who have been focused on the Jordan River. I think he did a great job. I would recommend people check it out.
Okay, sltrib.com for that one. Thank you. Brooke Larsen, what's an underplayed story you'd like to highlight?
I think, my colleague Mark Eddington is doing some interesting work down in Southwest Utah, and I'm excited to join him down there. He just did a story on St. George planning a I-15 expansion. We hear a lot about the I-15 expansions up here in northern Utah. And so just want to bring some light to what's happening in the southern part of the state as well.
Okay. And I'll just point out you and Mark had a story about some candidates running unopposed. That just appeared today. So
yeah, that's another local story. You can read to learn more about what's happening in the southwest corner of the state.
Yeah, I was interested. A couple of these candidates were surprised that they didn't have an opponent.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. A lot of, especially in our smaller towns, a lot of candidates running unopposed. So that's what the story's about. These three mayors in Washington County who are the sole candidates for mayor. Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to you reporting alongside Mark's there. Clarissa Casper, what's your underplayed story of the week?
Yeah, Courtney Tanner wrote a story about the University of Utah's decision to shut down a fraternity, Sigma Nu, due to widespread hazing and misconduct. yeah, that story was wild. So yeah, I would recommend checking that out.
Yeah, that's the boy. Yeah, that's there's some reasons why they shut it down. It's
Yeah.
pretty serious in some cases here. Yeah, check that one out as well. You can check all these stories out at sltrib.com. And on Behind the Headlines today, we've been talking with Salt Lake Tribune emerging news reporter Brock Marchant. Brock, thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Reporter Brooke Larsen has been with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Utah Public Radio and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper has been with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you've been listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Hope you'll be with me next time. Thanks for listening today.